Tonight, EWTN News Nightly is launching the results of an in-depth look at Catholic voters in America. EWTN News has partnered with Real Clear Opinion Research to bring exclusive polling ahead of the 2020 presidential election. The results give us a clear look at the issues Catholic voters are concerned about, as well as a look at the church in America. Joining me now are Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics, John Della Volpe, Director of Polling at Real Clear Opinion Research, and Matthew Bunson, Executive Editor for EWTN News. Welcome to all of you. I want to get started with you, Matthew. Tell me overall here, what was the purpose of this survey? Why did EWTN News want to do this?
Well, if EWTN News is going to serve the church and inform Catholics everywhere about the events in the world and where we are as a church in the United States, we need to have a very clear idea of where Catholics stand politically, but also how Catholics are living their life and where they're living their life. And so we see this as part of a service to American Catholicism, but also to the universal church. But we also see this as a kind of diagnostic tool, as a way of understanding where are the crisis points in the church in the United States. And once we have that kind of diagnosis, it's going to be up to the experts and church leaders to come up with prescriptions for where we go forward from here.
And it is a very interesting survey. John, I want to ask you, there's so many politicians over the years that talk about wanting to get the Catholic vote. They want to get out there and get those voters. But based on all of this information that we now have, is there such a thing as a Catholic vote?
Absolutely. And it's one of the most critical building blocks, I think, of any winning coalition. In fact, for most elections over the last 50 years or so, the one group that has been most predictive of the popular vote winner has been Catholics. So understanding, tuning in to what Catholics think about politically is critical for any successful campaign, especially in a general election. Overall, the Catholic vote represents about almost a quarter, 22 to 24 or so percent of all votes cast, and we'll get into it a little bit later, but there are constituencies within that voter block as well, so it's not a monolith, but there is most certainly a Catholic vote. That vote in 2016 mirrored the popular vote almost perfectly.
Very interesting. So Carl, to follow up on that, what do you think are the biggest takeaways from the poll, and especially as we look ahead into this new election year?
Well, I'd say two things, and the first is just following on what John said. Devout Catholics are very much still with this president and with the Republican Party, but they're with Donald J. Trump. And, that it mirrors, this poll shows, it's the mirror image of what's going on in the evangelical church, in the Protestant church, which is where the mainstream Protestants and the younger Protestants are less likely to be Republicans. But evangelical Christians who are devout, who go to church regularly or identify themselves as evangelicals, they're a powerful voting bloc. If you combine them with these devout Catholics who go to Mass once a week or more, now you're talking about a coalition. Maybe we ought to be talking about the Christian vote in journalism and political science, because that's the thing that most struck me about this. But the other thing is, and this, if you're a Democrat, this would be in your favor. The Republicans don't have an unlimited number of election cycles. Next year might be the last one where they can, with the status quo the way it is, because younger Catholics, like younger non-Catholics, are less likely to be Republican, less likely to be liberal, or less likely to be conservative on these issues, and less likely to support the president. So those two takeaways struck me.
It is interesting to look about some of the changing demographics there. John, was there anything in terms of this data that surprised you or stood out to you?
I do think the changing demographics, and to add some more to that, is the difference between the generations. Difference between the generations is significant, and for the first time, we'll have more younger Americans, younger Catholics voting than older Catholics voting in 2020. So that's something that's worth keeping an eye on as well. But this is the first of a series of polls that will be conducted over the next year, and this is essentially kind of a baseline to understand kind of where the Catholic vote is today, where the similarities are with the overall general electorate, generally, where the differences are, where the similarities are, and how the vote kind of emerges and changes, if it does, over the next year or so. And we have a lot more questions to ask.
Sure.
Well, and one thing too that this poll tends to confirm, so it's less of a surprise as much as it is a confirmation of the rising influence of Latino Catholics on American Catholicism. 37% in this poll. We know that any sort of factoring in of where the Catholic vote is going to go, now we have to pay very close attention to Latino Catholics.
And like you said, that's so consistent with what we've talked about on this program. So John, you are confident about the accuracy of this survey?
Of course, and to make sure that we're accurately representing 37% of Catholics, we conducted the poll in English as well as in Spanish, because oftentimes, people are more comfortable with one language tend to answer questions differently than others. So we did that. This includes, several thousand registered voters. We oversampled Catholics. We're able to look at Catholics based on gender, based on age, based on race and ethnicity, et cetera. And again, this is just a snapshot in time. But what is unique about this poll is it's over 100 questions long, but it's less about what's happening today in terms of predicting the election and more about the underlying issues and values of this vote and how those, I think, will ultimately be kind of a lens of which we hope that the audience as well as candidates can kind of connect with them.
We're going to continue to talk more about the survey in the coming days, so I want to thank you all for being here. Matthew Bunson, John Della Volpe, Carl Cannon, thank you all so much.